So let's continue our discussion in patterns of stars. So open your book on page 350. In table 12.4, it shows the 10 brightest stars seen from the northern hemisphere. The number one is the Neb. Under Cygnus constellations, it is 65,500 brighter than the sun. So it is shows, or you can observe this star on the month of July, August, and September. Next is Rigel under the Orion constellations. It is 59,700 brighter than the sun. You can observe this star on the month of January, February, and March. The third one is the Pollux under Gemini. Brightness is 34,000 than the sun. February, March, and April. Next is the Betelgeuse under Orion constellation, 19,700 brighter than the star. So you can observe this brighter than the sun. You can observe this star on the month of January, February, and March. The fifth one is Spica under constellation Virgo. It is 15,000 brighter than the sun. It can be observed on the month of April, May, and June. The sixth one is the Antares under the constellation Scorpius, 6,550 brighter than the sun. It can be observed on the month of May, June, and July. The seventh one is the Aldebaran under the constellation Taurus. It is 180 brighter than the sun. It can be observed on the month of December, January, and February. The eighth one is the Capella under the constellations Auriga. It is 150 times brighter than the sun, and it can be observed on the month of December, January, and February. Next is the Arcturus under the Boots constellations. Its brightness is 105 brighter than the sun, and it can be observed on the month of April, May, and June. The last one is the Regulus under the constellation Leo. Its brightness is 92 times than the sun, and it can be observed on the month of March, April, and May. So constellations can be found in the northern and southern hemisphere. So they are also found in specific seasons and directions. So there are constellations that you can see in specific season and directions, and there are constellations that is visible all throughout the year. So using the constellation map, identify some constellation and stars in the north sky. So figure 12.8 on page 351, we have there the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. So you can see different constellation on the southern hemisphere at the same time in the northern hemisphere. So the stars shown are visible at different times of the year to the observers in different latitudes. In the northern hemisphere, the shape of some constellation appear different in the two maps because of different standpoints used. So that is the southern and northern hemisphere, and you can see different constellations in these images. So what is the use of constellations, or what are the uses of constellations? So in the ancient times, constellations help people remember their favorite stories about they considered as gods. Later on, constellation help people in many ways. Our knowledge about constellation will help us knowing general directions, measuring and telling seasons, locating certain stars and galaxies, and tracking artificial satellites launch into Earth's orbit. So these four are the major uses of constellations. So let's talk about constellation tell general directions. So in the previous or in the latter part of our discussion, we've said that some stars can be found in the southern hemisphere and northern hemisphere. Constellations are useful to navigators. So the Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, and the Cassiopeia are constellations that are used by navigators to tell the north direction. Okay. So while the Polaris, the last star of the handle of the Little Dipper, tells the north one, and it is visible on the northern hemisphere. So the Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, and the Polaris are visible on the northern hemisphere. So this star is pointing toward the axis of the Earth, telling the location of the north celestial pole. So next one is the Orion constellation. So the Orion constellation, if the Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, and Polaris tells the north direction, the Orion constellation tells the east and west sky. So the southern cross of Crux constellation is called the southern hemisphere. It contains four brightest stars so situated that they depict the extremities of the Latin cross. This constellation tells the south sky, or the Orion constellation tells the east and west sky, while the southern cross or crux constellation tells the south sky. So going back, Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, and Polaris tells the north sky, and while the Orion constellation and Southern Cross or Crux constellation tells the south sky. Another use of constellations is it constellation measure and tell seasons. So the constellations, which we call the zodiac, keep a definite circular belt or path in the sky. So here are the different constellations based on seasons. So Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Aquarius visible only during winter, while Pisces, Taurus, and Aries are visible during the spring season. Gemini, Cancer, and Leo are visible during summer. Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio are visible during autumn. So the zodiac sign tells also the season. So the zodiac is an imaginary belt or path in the heavens that includes the paths of the planets. So the different constellations can be seen in a particular month and seasons. So the zodiac signs also zodiac signs are constellations. Next is constellations are used to locate stars and galaxies. So constellations are used by astronomers to locate stars, nebulae, and galaxies. So the Flame Nebula, also called the NGC 2024, is a region dust and gas in the constellation Orion. So in the past, last week we talked about the stars, and stars form through dust and gas. They start with a nebula. So the Flame Nebula, also called the NGC 2024, is a region of dust and gas in the constellation Orion. So the Horsehead Nebula is also in the Orion constellation. The Dark Nebula is visible from Earth only because it blocks the light coming from the young stars located behind the nebula. So the Horse or the Dark Nebula, they call it dark nebula because it is visible only on the Earth. So those are the uses of constellation. First is constellation tells general direction. Next, constellations measure and tell seasons. And the last one is constellations are used to locate stars and galaxies.